Shit sound like 007 and 64 and shit. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Albedo is the amount of solar radiation reflected. How the albedo effect works is that solar energy from the sun rays reach the surface, then they are reflected back into space. Objects that are light-colored have a high albedo. Dark-colored objects have a low albedo. Dark objects such as the ocean absorb the solar energy, while ice and snow-covered ice reflects incoming solar radiation. As the floating ice melts, water continues to absorb solar energy. The temperature of the water increases, which leads to the amount of ice decreasing. What once was floating sea ice is now becoming water. Greenland is covered by ice caps and sheets. What once was a high albedo surface has become a low albedo surface. More and more water is being produced. Thus, more solar energy absorbed, or less and less sunlight is reflected. This connects to our topic because the albedo effect was once a perfectly balanced system where sea level was balanced, but now is unbalanced and sea level is rising.
Coastal states such as New York, Florida, and Louisiana will have serious threats to their residents. Outside of our country, will have serious threats to their residents. Outside of our country, the Republic of Kiribati, located in Southeast Asia, is just a few feet above sea level. Since 1880, sea levels have risen 10 inches. This rise in sea level sounds small, but for the barely elevated nation could lead to the natives being forced off their land. In Panama, sea levels will rise 3/4 of an inch annually, which means that the islands could be underwater in 20 to 30 years. Just a rise in 1.5 feet would lead to $6.5 trillion worth of property in the U.S. being exposed to sea level rise. According to the New York Times, Miami is a city built on porous limestone, which allows seawater to seep through the foundation.
According to the IPCC, a range of policies have been effective in decreasing greenhouse emissions. Yet the amount of gases being emitted is a much larger number compared to the amount of gas decreasing. If these attempts succeed, by 2100, 6 to 20 inches of sea level rising would be reduced. This is not very likely though, because we already have released carbon dioxide that will stay in the atmosphere for centuries to come. Since these policies were put in place, they will still most likely not work. People have understood the fact and have moved inland. According to New York Times, places such as Panama have residents being informed to eventually move. This has been unsuccessful because of the citizens who either are old, weak, or cannot afford to move. Houses have been moved farther from shore because, year by year, the water comes too close to the houses. However, this is not a permanent solution. Seas will rise too high if a permanent solution is not put in.
Times this summer, the Jersey Shore will be hosting many tourists. The recent Sandy hurricane was a message to move inland to the native people from New Jersey. Yet the first issue being discussed was how to rebuild the coast. People need to move inland where land is promised to stay instead of facing coast.
Many emails and not receiving a response. To a response to our interviews, we predicted what an expert would respond with to our questions regarding sea level rise using trusted resources. Why is ice melting quickest at the poles? According to the New York Times, the ice at the poles works as a bowl. As water warms, the brim of the bowl thins and breaks. What would you expect the world to look like without ice at the poles? According to the New York Times, without the Antarctic ice sheet, sea levels would rise 12 feet, devastating the coastlines. Is sea level rise stoppable or is it inevitable? The recent collapse of the glacier in Antarctica proves that sea level rise is inevitable, but the process can be slowed. What does sea level rise mean for the people living in the world? Particular Americans who have almost half their population living on the coastlines will be very vulnerable to sea level rise. Who is responsible for sea level rise? Everyone contributes in their own way, but the main contributor is the government for not placing policies against greenhouse gas emitting companies. In order to decrease the level of the seas, we need to work together. Just like other problems with the environment, we can decrease sea level by simple and complex tasks. By supporting the NRDC, who are urging elected officials to make policies regarding greenhouse gas emissions. According to the NRDC, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere would decrease if people used renewable energy, such as solar panels that use the sunlight as energy. By using alternative transportation such as public transit or using a bike, greenhouse gas emissions would also decrease.
Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
Shit sound like 007 and